The Ndlovu family sat around a long dinner table in their Johannesburg mansion, silver cutlery shining under the chandelier. Zanille watched her parents laugh as if nothing was wrong, even though she knew the mortgage bills were piling up in the study drawer. She had carried this burden for too long, and that night she decided she would not be silent anymore. With a steady voice, she looked at them and said, "I'll pay the mortgage, when you downsize." For a moment, the room froze. Then the storm began. Her aunt's voice cracked the air, calling her ungrateful. Her brother Thabo leapt from his chair, pointing at her and shouting that she was killing family pride. Her mother slammed her palm onto the table so hard the glasses shook. "How can you be so cruel?" she cried. Zanille did not flinch. She kept her eyes calm, her voice firm, even as anger and accusations flew at her from every direction. She had grown used to being the one everyone expected to save the family, the one who would quietly pour her hard-earned money into their endless debts. But this time, she refused to be manipulated by their pride or their guilt. As their voices rose higher, she sat straighter, her calmness only making them more furious. The mansion that once felt grand now felt like a cage of lies, and for the first time, she pushed back against it. Deep down, she knew the truth, her words tonight would change everything. Days after that explosive dinner, Zanille's phone would not stop ringing. Every time she picked it up, it was another cousin, aunt, or family friend ready to scold her. The messages came in waves, long, emotional paragraphs telling her she had forgotten her roots, short angry lines accusing her of breaking the family apart, even voice notes filled with tears and shouting. Her cousins were the loudest. They told her she was abandoning the so-called heritage property, the mansion that, in their words, carried the blood and pride of the Ndlovu name. They made it sound like walking away from the house was the same as walking away from the family itself. Her father was worse. His calls came late at night, his voice heavy with disappointment. He told her she was dishonoring their ancestors, that every brick of the mansion was built on sacrifice, that her refusal to save it was the same as spitting on the family name. Each word carried guilt like a blade, meant to cut her into surrender. He reminded her of the times he paid her school fees, the times he said he had sacrificed for her future. Now, he said, it was her turn to sacrifice for them. They painted her as the villain in every conversation. To them, Zanille was no longer the daughter who worked hard to keep the family afloat. She was the selfish one, the cold one, the one too proud to bend for her parents. A real daughter, her uncle's message read, would never let her parents feel shame. The words repeated in her head like an echo, following her through the day. But Zanille knew better. She knew their love was mixed with control, their concern poisoned with pride. Every guilt-soaked word, every dramatic phone call, was not really about family, it was about power. They wanted her to give in, to rescue them again, to keep pretending the house was a symbol of legacy instead of the mountain of debt it had become. Alone in her apartment, Zanille stared at her phone as it lit up with another incoming call. She could hear her mother's voice leaving yet another message, sobbing about shame, neighbors, and gossip. For a moment, she closed her eyes and let the noise wash over her. Then she placed the phone face down on the table. She was tired of being the easy target, tired of being the one they pushed until she broke. For once, she decided, she would not answer. The mansion was not her prison, and their guilt was not her chain. Let them talk, let them cry, let them call her cruel. She knew the truth, she was not abandoning her family, she was saving herself from being drowned by their endless pride. And deep inside, even as the messages piled up, she felt a quiet strength growing. It was the strength of someone who refused to be controlled any longer. What the family didn't know was that Zanille had stopped trusting their stories a long time ago. While they shouted about pride and ancestors, she was quietly searching for the truth. She hired a financial investigator, a quiet man who didn't ask too many questions but dug through numbers and bank statements like a detective. He worked in silence for weeks, sending her updates at odd hours. Each report revealed cracks in the shiny picture her family loved to show off. And then one night, the final report came in, and the truth hit her harder than all the insults combined. Her brother Tabo, the same one who had screamed at her about killing family pride, had been siphoning money out of the family accounts for months. The investigator traced transfers, hidden accounts, and fake invoices. All of it led to one foolish dream. Tabo had tried to start a luxury car dealership, importing flashy vehicles that never sold. The scheme had already collapsed, leaving behind a trail of debt and disappointment. What he called business was nothing but a reckless gamble with the family's money. Suddenly, the pieces fit. The constant pressure on Zanil, the desperation to save the house, the endless guilt trips, it wasn't just about the mansion. It was about hiding Tabo's mess. The mansion wasn't a symbol of family pride, it was the mask covering fraud, bad loans, and broken promises. Every time they accused Zanil of being ungrateful, they were really protecting the secret shame of their golden son. She remembered how loudly Tabo had shouted at dinner, pointing his finger at her, accusing her of betraying the family. The memory now made her laugh bitterly. The real betrayal had been his. He had gambled with their name, their savings, and their future, and yet somehow she was the one being called cruel. Zanil sat in her living room with the papers spread out on the coffee table, the investigator's words circling in her mind. The family had built their world on lies, dressing them up as tradition and pride. And now, everything was crumbling. They wanted her to sink with them, to throw her money into a burning house, but she refused. She finally understood that saving them would mean losing herself. As she closed the folder and set it aside, she felt a strange calm. The truth no longer scared her, it freed her. She didn't need to argue with them anymore. She didn't need to defend herself against their endless guilt. The numbers spoke louder than their words, and the facts were on her side. To the world, the mansion still looked grand, but Zanil knew better. Behind those tall gates and polished windows was nothing but debt, secrets, and shame. The family called it heritage, but to her, it was just a sinking ship. And she had no intention of going down with it. One warm afternoon, the sound of the gate buzzer echoed through the Ndlovu mansion. The mailman stood outside holding a stack of letters, but one envelope was different. It was thick, official, and stamped boldly with the words foreclosure notice. He handed it over without a word. Zanil's mother carried it into the kitchen, her steps heavy, her face pale as if she already knew it was bad news. She sat at the long wooden table, tore the envelope open with shaking hands, and unfolded the papers. The words hit her like a blow. The bank had already begun proceedings. This wasn't a warning or a reminder, it was the final stage. The house wasn't just at risk anymore, it was already gone. Her lips parted, but no words came out. For the first time in a long time, the house was quiet. Even the ticking clock on the wall seemed louder than usual, each second reminding them that their time had run out. Her father walked in, saw the papers spread across the table, and froze. He pulled a chair, his eyes scanning the lines, and all the color drained from his face. "This can't be true," he whispered, though the evidence was right there in black and white. Her brother Tabo, who had always spoken the loudest, suddenly couldn't meet anyone's eyes. He fiddled with his phone, his arrogance slipping away with every passing second. The silence in the kitchen was heavier than any of their angry shouting had ever been. Pride could not fight the law. Tears slid down Zanil's mother's cheeks, dripping onto the page. It's finished," she said, her voice breaking. Her aunt, usually quick with insults, sat with her hands pressed together, unable to speak. The truth had finally arrived, and it was printed on official bank letterhead. All the accusations they had thrown at Zanil, all the emotional messages, all the guilt, they vanished in an instant. Reality had spoken louder than their pride. The mansion they clung to so desperately was no longer theirs. The heritage they claimed to protect was nothing more than a memory wrapped in debt. When Zanil walked in and saw them gathered around the table, she didn't need to ask what had happened. She saw the envelope, the papers, the broken faces. For the first time, no one shouted at her, no one called her cruel. They all looked at her instead, as if she had answers, as if she could still save them. But the time for saving had passed. Her father finally lifted his head and muttered, "Why didn't you warn us?" The question hung in the air like smoke. Zenil stood tall, her eyes steady. She had warned them, again and again, but they had chosen pride over truth. Now the truth had spoken for her, and it was louder than anything she could ever say. The kitchen was thick with silence. Papers from the foreclosure letter lay scattered on the table like broken pieces of glass, each one cutting deeper into the family's pride. No one dared to shout anymore. The same relatives who had filled Zenil's phone with angry messages now sat with their heads bowed, their voices gone. For the first time, the insults stopped. The mansion they fought to protect had slipped right through their fingers, and all their anger had nowhere to go. Slowly, every eye in the room turned to Zenil. It was almost strange. The same daughter they had mocked, the one they had called selfish and cruel, was now the only person in the room who looked calm. Her aunt, who had once yelled about her being ungrateful, couldn't even lift her gaze. Her brother Tabo, the man at the center of the secret mess, shifted uncomfortably in his chair, chewing on his lip, his arrogance drained away. And her mother, red-eyed and trembling, looked at her as if waiting for mercy. Finally, her father broke the silence. His voice was low, softer than Zenil had ever heard it. "Why didn't you warn us?" he muttered, his hands gripping the edge of the table. It was almost laughable. She had warned them, again and again, but they had been too proud to listen. Zenil leaned back in her chair, her face steady, her tone unbothered. "I did," she replied. "You just called it cruelty." The words cut through the room sharper than any insult they had ever thrown at her. Her father lowered his eyes, unable to respond. It was a strange reversal. For months, they had cornered her, throwing guilt and shame like stones. They had painted her as the villain, the cold-hearted daughter. But now, stripped of their pride, they had nothing left. The tables had turned, and everyone knew it. Her cousins exchanged nervous glances, their mouths opening as if to speak but no words coming out. Tabo tried to form an excuse, but his voice cracked and died in his throat. Even the house seemed to echo the shift, where once the walls carried shouting and arrogance, now they carried silence and shame. Zenil didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. She sat back, calm and collected, watching them squirm in the truth they had avoided for so long. The power they once used to control her with guilt had dissolved, leaving only the raw reality of their failure. And in that silence, Zenil felt something she hadn't felt in years. Not victory, not revenge, just peace. She no longer carried the weight of proving herself or fighting to be heard. The truth had spoken for her, and now they had no choice but to listen. For the first time, the family wasn't in control of her. She was in control of herself, and that was enough. While her family had been busy screaming at her, accusing her of betrayal, and drowning in their pride, Zenil had been building something they knew nothing about. She refused to throw her hard-earned money into a house that was never truly hers. To her, the mansion was nothing more than a debt trap with pretty walls. Instead of wasting millions trying to rescue it, she made a choice that would change her future. Quietly, without telling anyone, she began investing in something real, something that would grow instead of collapse. Zenil had poured her savings into a private real estate trust. No fancy announcements, no dramatic speeches, just smart, quiet moves. While her cousins were busy gossiping about her cold heart, and her parents were drowning in loans, she was signing deeds in boardrooms, her name etched on legal papers that represented entire apartment blocks in Cape Town. She remembered the first time she held one of those signed deeds in her hands. It didn't just feel like paper, it felt like freedom. The apartments she invested in weren't just buildings. They were alive with tenants, families paying rent every month, students chasing their dreams, young professionals starting new lives. Each rent check that came in was proof that she had chosen the right path. While her family's mansion was bleeding money, her properties were already generating income. The numbers grew steadily in her accounts, quiet and consistent, like water filling a glass. The irony wasn't lost on her. While they called her selfish and cruel, she was becoming one of the smartest property owners in the city. While they claimed she was destroying heritage, she was quietly creating generational wealth on her own terms. They clung to an old house that was sinking, she was building a foundation so strong it could last for decades. At night, when her phone buzzed with yet another angry message, Zenil didn't feel anger anymore. She would sit back, sip her tea, and glance at the files neatly stacked on her desk: contracts, rental agreements, proof of income. Those papers reminded her that she was not heartless, she was wise. She was not abandoning her future for their mistakes. Zenil never gloated, never threw her success in their faces. She didn't need to. The truth was simple: while they begged her to rescue a crumbling past, she was securing a thriving future. Every decision she made was planting seeds that would grow long after the mansion had been repossessed and forgotten. She realized then that real love wasn't about drowning with the people who refused to swim. Real love, at least in her eyes, was about breaking the cycle, choosing strength, choosing survival, and proving that she could rise without carrying everyone else's mistakes on her back. And in that quiet, steady rise, Zenil found her freedom. It did not take long for the news to spread. In the quiet streets of Johannesburg, the story of the Ndlovu mansion traveled faster than fire. Neighbors who once looked up to the tall gates and shining windows now lowered their voices when they walked past. The mansion that had once been a symbol of power and legacy, now carried a for sale sign hammered into the front yard. People who used to admire the family whispered to each other, shaking their heads at how quickly pride had turned into downfall. Former friends who had attended grand dinners in the mansion began to gossip behind closed doors. They remembered how the Ndlovu spoke of heritage and wealth, how they looked down on others, and now those same people were being forced out of the house they claimed was untouchable. The shame that Zenil's parents had feared so much had finally come, but it did not come because she refused to pay their debts. It came because of their own arrogance, their refusal to listen, their obsession with appearances. The story became entertainment for many. In shops, salons, and church groups, people whispered about the Ndlovu family losing everything. Some felt pity, but most saw it as a lesson. They spoke about how the family had mocked the very daughter who tried to help them, and how they had turned her into the villain. Now the truth was out in the open, and everyone could see that Zenil had been right all along. For Zenil, it was strange to watch from a distance. She never wished for her family's humiliation, but she knew it was no longer in her hands. She remembered every insult, every cruel word, every accusation of being heartless. And now, those same words returned to her family, not from her lips but from the lips of the community. The very people her parents wanted to impress were now the ones laughing quietly at their downfall. Her father avoided walking through the neighborhood, embarrassed to face people he once called friends. Her mother, who once bragged about the mansion at church gatherings, now sat in silence when others spoke. Thabo, stripped of his false pride, kept his head low, unable to defend himself. The grand house, the so-called heritage, had been repossessed and sold to strangers. The gates no longer carried their name. The shame that haunted the Ndlovus was not something Zenil carried. She walked freely, unbothered, her head high. People who once judged her now looked at her differently, some even admiring her strength. The truth was simple: Zenil did not destroy the family's pride. They destroyed it themselves. And while they struggled under the weight of their arrogance, she had quietly built a future that could never be taken away. The legacy they dreamed of was gone, but hers was just beginning. The sun poured through the wide glass windows of Zenil's new penthouse, the ocean stretching endlessly in front of her. The salty air carried a freedom she had never felt in the mansion back in Johannesburg. She stood there quietly, her hands wrapped around a warm cup of coffee, watching the waves rise and fall like the steady rhythm of her new life. She was not bitter, not angry, not even triumphant. She simply felt at peace. When a reporter came to speak with her about the Ndlovu scandal, he expected anger or bragging, maybe even revenge. Instead, he found calm. Sitting on a white couch, Zenil spoke slowly, her voice steady. She explained that love was not always about rescuing people, that sometimes the hardest love was stepping back and letting others face the truth. Sometimes, she said, looking out at the sea, love means letting people face the truth. They called me cruel, until the bank called them bankrupt. Her words carried more weight than any headline. It wasn't a speech of victory, but of wisdom. She didn't point fingers, didn't list names, didn't tear her family down further. She let the truth speak for itself. The reporter sat in silence for a moment, realizing he wasn't just covering a scandal, he was witnessing the story of a woman who had chosen strength over guilt. As the interview ended, Zenil turned back to the ocean. She knew her family's shame would be talked about for years, but that no longer belonged to her. Her life had moved forward. The mansion was gone, but she had built something stronger. Her story wasn't about cruelty or betrayal, it was about freedom.